I never thought my retirement dream would turn into the kind of nightmare you only see in documentaries. About small-town corruption, the cabin I inherited from my father wasn't just wood, nails and stone. It was memory, legacy, and freedom wrapped into 2 acres of heaven by the lake. That morning, as I poured coffee into my chipped ceramic mug, the sun cracked open the sky with a slow orange blaze, and I thought, this is what peace looks like. I had no idea that within hours, that peace would be shattered by a woman whose entire life seemed to revolve around controlling other people. They call her Karen now, because what else do you call someone who shows up uninvited, convinced the rules bend to her? But her real name was Valerie Crane, president of our HOA, a woman with a reputation for heels that clicked like gunshots on wooden floors, a perfume cloud that clung to the air like smoke, and a face permanently arranged in a smirk that said she knew something you didn't. She'd been circling me for months, sending letters, citations, warnings, all crafted in legal jargon meant to intimidate. To me, it felt like death by paper cuts. But what she didn't know was that I had something she could never prepare for. The state's top prosecutor sitting in my living room, sipping coffee, listening carefully to every detail of her so-called enforcement the night before. I'd barely slept. Every sound outside had me on edge. The crunch of gravel on the driveway, the creak of the old dock, the howl of a stray dog out by the trees. It wasn't just paranoia, it was preparation. Because when you're dealing with someone who thrives on intimidation, you learn to expect the worst. My father used to tell me, son, bullies get loudest when they feel their grip slipping. And Valerie Crane had been getting louder by the day. She started with my dock. That weathered stretch of wood had been standing for 50 years, built with my father's hands and reinforced by mine. To me, it was sacred. To her, it was a violation of community standards. Then came the fines, $500, then $1,000, then threats of liens on my property. She thought I'd fold, like my neighbors had. Families who'd lived here for decades, suddenly deciding to sell after endless harassment. I didn't buy her story then, and I sure as hell don't now. There was money moving behind the scenes, developers with hungry eyes. And Valerie Crane was the gatekeeper selling them the keys. What she didn't expect was me walking into the county clerk's office and digging out the original deed from 1965. It showed, clear as daylight, that our family's property rights extended 50 feet into the lake, long before the HOA even existed. In that moment, the weight of my father's words hit me. The land will protect you if you protect it back. I had the proof, the paper trail, the legal foundation that her empire of citations couldn't shake, so I called someone I never thought I'd call, the state attorney general's office, and to my surprise, they called back. They'd been investigating HOA corruption for months, and my stack of letters, fines, and photos of Valerie's harassment wasn't just evidence, it was the missing puzzle piece they needed. They sent an investigator first, then a prosecutor, and finally, the Attorney General herself. Which brings me back to that morning, standing in my cabin kitchen, with sunlight spilling through lace curtains, brewing coffee for the one person who could bring Valerie Crane's reign of terror to an end, and then the crash. My cabin door exploded inward like it had been kicked by a battering ram. Splinters flew across the floor, and my old family photo of Dad holding up a trout fell from the wall, glass shattering. The sound echoed across the lake, startling the loons out of the reeds. Valerie Crane stood there, heels crunching over broken glass, voice raised to the heavens about violations and jurisdiction. She hadn't even looked to see who was inside. She didn't care. She was there to dominate, to show she was in control. Only this time, she had just stormed into the wrong room at the wrong time. Because sitting 10 feet away, pen poised over a legal pad, was Attorney General Patricia Hale, a woman known across the state for taking down corrupt contractors, crooked sheriffs, and more than one corporate executive who thought they were untouchable. She looked up slowly, adjusted her glasses, and gave me a small nod. The kind of nod that says, "We've got her." Valerie froze mid, eyes darting between me and the Attorney General, realization dawning too late. Her live stream was still running, thousands of followers watching in real time as the self-appointed queen of the HOA walked herself straight into a felony charge, and me. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like prey. I felt like the storm had finally broken and the sun was about to come through. To understand how we ended up with my front door lying in pieces and the state's top prosecutor taking notes at my kitchen table, you need to rewind 6 months. Back when I still believed the lake was my sanctuary and not a battlefield. Back when I thought retirement meant mornings with coffee and mist rising off the water. Not stacks of legal threats piled on my porch. My name's Daniel Walker, 55 years old. Son of a Vietnam veteran and grandson of a carpenter who believed land wasn't something you owned so much as something you safeguarded. My grandfather bought this cabin in 1965 for $1,200, a fortune to him back then. But today, it's lakefront property worth more than entire subdivisions. He built it with his own hands. Pine logs notched tight as puzzle pieces, a stone chimney hauled rock by rock, a porch that creaked in all the right places. When he passed it to my father, and my father to me, it came with a kind of unwritten contract. Don't squander this. Protect it. That's what I thought I was doing when I left the city after 30 years climbing power poles and fixing transformers in every kind of weather God ever threw at Texas. I figured I'd earned a quiet life. Fishing at dawn, firewood stacked neat by the door, maybe teaching my grandson how to tie a proper hook knot the way my grandfather taught me. But peace has a way of drawing people who want to reshape it. And in our case, her name was Valerie Crane. She arrived in a pearl-white SUV with vanity plates that literally read Rule 1. I laughed when I first saw it, thought it was some kind of bad joke. It wasn't. She carried herself like a general surveying a battlefield. Clipboard always in hand, sunglasses perched high like she didn't need to look anyone in the eye. Within weeks of her arrival, 3 elderly couples had sold their cabins at prices that made no sense given the rising market. Rumor was, they were pressured by non-compliance fines. I brushed it off. After all, my property predated the HOA by 3 decades. Surely, their rules didn't apply to me. Surely, common sense would prevail. Then the citations started. The first was for my dock, the same dock my grandfather and I had rebuilt. When I was 12, hands blistered, proud as kings when it was done. According to Valerie, it was an unsightly structure, lowering community property values. The fine was $500, payable to something called the Community Improvement Fund. I crumpled it and tossed it in the wood stove. The second came 3 days later. This time for my solar panels' hazardous installation, she wrote. I had personally installed them with the help of union brothers who'd wired entire hospitals. My system was cleaner and safer than anything in town, and she knew it. The fine, $750. Then came the garden. Yes, my vegetable garden, the one where I grew tomatoes so sweet, my neighbors used to trade pies for them. Unauthorized agricultural use, she called it, another $300. Within a month, I had 4 citations totaling over $2,000. My mailbox looked like a courthouse filing cabinet, stuffed with official-looking envelopes, stamped Compliance Office. Neighbors who'd once waved from their porches began avoiding eye contact. A few whispered apologies at the gas station. One even admitted that Valerie had cornered him, suggesting he file complaints against me or risk being reviewed himself. That's when the pattern clicked. She wasn't just enforcing rules. She was building a climate of fear. One neighbor at a time, she was tightening the noose. My father used to say, when someone wants your land badly enough, find out why. That phrase echoed in my head every night as I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the mounting fines. Something was off. Too many coincidences. Too many families selling too cheap. So I did what Pop would have done. I went to the county courthouse. The clerk, Betty, remembered my family. She led me into a dusty records room and slid out the original survey map from 1965. There it was. Clear as day, our lot extended 50 feet into the lake. The dock wasn't on community waterway. It was on our water. The HOA hadn't even been founded until 1999, 34 years after my grandfather bought the land, which meant their rules didn't apply to my dock at all. I walked out of there with copies of every document. My hands trembling, but my spine straighter than it had been in weeks. But Valerie didn't back off. She doubled down. First came the parade of inspectors. Building code, environmental services, fire marshal, each showing up with anonymous complaints, each leaving empty-handed because everything passed inspection. But the point wasn't to win in court. It was to bury me in hassle, make my retirement feel like a never-ending audit. Then came the smear campaign. A local news segment featuring Valerie standing on my dock telling the camera about dangerous conditions threatening children's safety. Facebook posts warning parents to keep their kids away from the Eastern Shore because of aggressive behavior from a resident. My name wasn't even in the post, but everyone knew. Within hours, it had been shared dozens of times. Suddenly, I wasn't just a stubborn property owner, I was a supposed menace. The lowest blow came one night when I found orange spray paint across my mailbox. Comply or leave. My hidden trail camera caught the license plate of Valerie's Escalade, leaving at 2:30 a.m. I took it to the sheriff's office. Guess who showed up? Deputy Chad Crane, her nephew. He shrugged, said it was probably kids, and closed the notebook without writing a word. That was the moment something in me hardened. I realized this wasn't just about fines. It wasn't just about one neighbor drunk on power. This was organized, coordinated, profitable. And if there's one thing 30 years in the union taught me, it's this. Paper trails don't lie. So I started documenting every citation, every inspection, every anonymous complaint, every conversation with neighbors pressured into silence. I turned my back bedroom into what looked like a detective's office. Maps, timelines, receipts pinned to I wasn't just defending my cabin anymore. I was building a case. That's when a friend of mine, Chuck Davis, a lawyer I'd gone to high school with, stopped by for a beer. I showed him the stack of files. He whistled low and said, "Danny, you don't realize what you've got here. The Attorney General's office is already investigating HOA fraud rings across the state. This could be their missing piece." For the first time since Valerie Crane rolled her SUV into our community, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Hope is a fragile thing when you've been under siege. At first, I didn't trust it. I figured Chuck was just trying to cheer me up, that the Attorney General's office had bigger fish to fry than one tired rancher with a pile of HOA fines. But when I got the call, a calm, professional voice asking if I'd be willing to meet with investigators in Abilene, I knew this was real. They sent two people, Sarah Mitchell, a sharp-eyed prosecutor who looked like she could sniff out a lie from across the room, and David Bennett, younger, but with the kind of steady focus that made you feel like every word you said mattered. I laid out my files on the diner table, the clatter of coffee cups and the smell of bacon filling the air as I walked them through months of harassment. They didn't interrupt much, just took notes, asked pointed questions, and exchanged glances at certain details like the community improvement fund account number at the bottom of every fine notice. When I finished, Sarah tapped her pen against the papers and said, "Mr. Walker, what you've documented here isn't just harassment. It's the blueprint of a fraud operation. If we can prove the money flow, this could open up a statewide case." That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about saving my cabin. It was about exposing something much bigger. But Valerie Crane wasn't going to make it easy. The more I worked with the AG's office, the more aggressive she became. It was almost like she could smell that the tide was turning. First, my solar panels mysteriously stopped working. My buddy Jake, an electrician, found the wires had been loosened deliberately, not enough to cause a fire, just enough to sabotage the system. Then my septic system backed up, flooding the yard with a stench so strong it made my eyes water. The emergency techs found industrial drain cleaner poured into the lines, killing the bacteria that kept everything running. Each incident cost me time, money, and sleep, but each one also gave me evidence. Jake photographed the tampered wires. The septic team provided chemical analysis, proving sabotage. Sarah told me to log everything, no matter how small. Criminals escalate when they feel cornered, she said. Every reckless move she makes only strengthens our case. Still, it wore me down. There were nights I sat on the porch with a beer in hand, wondering if this fight was worth it. I'd worked 30 years for the quiet life, and instead, I was caught in a storm of lies, vandalism, and threats. But every time I thought about giving in, I'd hear my father's voice. The land doesn't belong to you, son. You belong to it. And if you abandon it, you abandon yourself. That kept me going. Neighbors began to notice too. A few who'd once kept their heads down started showing up with quiet words of support. Paula, who lived 3 cabins down, slipped me a note at the grocery store. She's been doing this for years. We're all afraid, but if you stand up, maybe the rest of us will too. Another family, the Martinezes, confessed that Valerie had pressured them into filing bogus complaints against me. They hated themselves for it, but didn't know how to fight back. That's when I realized this wasn't just my battle anymore, it was our community's. The Attorney General's office wanted to build the strongest case possible. So they asked me to keep documenting, keep baiting Valerie into revealing her true colors. It wasn't hard, her temper was as predictable as the sunrise. When the AGS team floated the idea of holding a reform announcement at my cabin, I almost laughed. You want to make my place ground zero? I asked. Sarah just smiled. If her pattern holds, she won't be able to resist. She tried to disrupt it, and we'll be waiting. I agreed. Not because I wanted the fight, but because I knew it was the only way to end it. In the meantime, Valerie's tactics reached new lows. She organized what she called the Beautification Committee, which was really just a hit squad for anyone who didn't fall in line. Suddenly, neighbors were being cited for mailbox colors, lawn chairs, even bird feeders. The message was clear: help Daniel Walker, and you're next. But something unexpected happened. Instead of breaking us apart, her heavy hand started pushing people together. One by one, folks began showing up at my porch in the evenings, bringing coffee, pie, or just quiet company. We'd sit in the glow of the kerosene lamp, swapping stories of her intimidation tactics. Each story was worse than the last. Elderly couples forced to sell, young families driven out, false citations that drained savings accounts. It was no longer just gossip. It was testimony. And as I pinned each story to the corkboard in my back room, I felt the weight shift. For months, I'd been playing defense. But now we had momentum. The breakthrough came late one night as I sifted through a stack of fine notices. At the bottom of one, in tiny print, was the account number for the Community Improvement Fund. Something about it gnawed at me. I took it to Betty at the clerk's office, and sure enough, when she pulled up the HOA's filings, the numbers didn't add up. Hundreds of thousands collected, barely any recorded expenses. Landscaping services billed to a company that didn't exist before Valerie took office. Insurance claims for storm damage on days the weather had been cleared. Fraud. Plain and simple. I copied every page, hands shaking with equal parts rage and relief. All this time, Valerie had been painting me as the problem, when in truth, she was robbing the entire community blind. When I showed Sarah and David the files, they looked like Christmas had come early. This is it, Sarah said. This ties everything together: harassment, fraud, embezzlement. And with your neighbors willing to testify, we can bring the hammer down. I walked out of that meeting lighter than I'd felt in months. For the first time, it wasn't just me standing against her, it was the law. But Valerie wasn't finished, not by a long shot. And her final mistake, the one that would seal her fate, was believing she could still intimidate her way out of the corner she'd backed herself into. The weeks leading up to the Attorney General's visit felt like living inside a powder keg. Every morning I woke to some new anonymous complaint or piece of vandalism, and every night I added another line to my growing logbook. But underneath the stress, there was a hum of something stronger. Anticipation. Agent Rebecca Torres from the FBI's white-collar crime unit flew in to join the AG's team. She was direct, no nonsense. The kind of woman who could walk into a room and immediately own it. Mr. Walker, she said on her first day at the cabin, What you've built here is more than a case file. It's a blueprint for dismantling an entire network. But to nail it shut, we need her to cross the line in real time. Her plan was bold. My cabin would host Attorney General Patricia Williamson for a closed-door strategy session. Cameras and microphones hidden in every corner. Law enforcement staged in the woods like hunters waiting for the right moment. And if Valerie's pattern held, she wouldn't be able to resist showing up uninvited. With her phone streaming live, I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity. You want me to let the wolf walk straight into the hen? Torres just smiled. Exactly. Only this time, the wolf walks out in handcuffs. So we prepared. My living room became a command center, disguised as a lakeside cabin. Cameras tucked in bookshelves, recorders hidden in the stone fireplace, agents posing as fishermen on the dock. Even the old kerosene lamp on my porch hid a lens. If Valerie so much as breathed near my property, it would be documented 6 ways to Sunday. Meanwhile, Valerie was unraveling. She'd grown reckless, lashing out in ways that betrayed her fear. Her SUV idled outside my driveway at odd hours. Deputies, always her nephew Chad, leading the charge, cruised past like circling vultures. Anonymous Facebook accounts spewed lies about me being dangerous, unstable, a threat to families. One post even warned parents not to let their kids near Walker's Shore, claiming I'd threatened children. It was slander so outrageous, it would have been laughable if it hadn't spread like wildfire. But instead of breaking me, each desperate move gave us more rope to hang her with. The night before the AG's visit, I barely slept. I sat on the porch with Pop's old Bible, running my fingers over the underlined verse he'd always loved. Sometimes the little guy wins because he's fighting for something bigger than himself. I thought about the Hendersons, forced to sell their place for pennies. About Mrs. Patterson, who left her home of 40 years in tears. About every neighbor who'd been cowed into silence by fear of Valerie Crane. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was theirs. Morning came sharp and clear, sunlight bouncing off the lake like shards of glass. At exactly 9 o'clock, Attorney General Williamson pulled into my gravel drive. She wasn't what I expected. No entourage, no flashing lights, just a woman in her 50s with steady eyes and a briefcase that looked like it weighed as much as a safe. She shook my hand firmly and settled into Pop's old recliner as though she'd sat there 100 times before. "Mr. Walker," she said, flipping open the case, "your documentation has helped us connect 6 counties worth of fraud. What happens here today could set a precedent for every community in this state." Before I could respond, we heard it. The low growl of an engine coming fast. Gravel sprayed against the mailbox. My chest tightened. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Valerie Crane. Her SUV screeched to a stop. Doors slamming, voices outside, barking about camera angles and audio feeds. She'd brought her own live stream crew, convinced she was about to play whistleblower in front of an audience of thousands. Torres' voice crackled in my earpiece from her post behind the woodshed. "Stand by, showtime." The sound of her heels on my porch was like a countdown clock. Click, click, click. Then crash. My door splintered inward, shards of wood skittering across the floor. She stormed in like a hurricane in a designer blazer, phone held high, eyes wild with adrenaline. "I demand to know why the Attorney General is secretly meeting with this man," she screamed, panning her phone around like a weapon. "This is political persecution. This is government harassment. Everyone on this lake answers to me." Williamson didn't flinch. She calmly rose, badge in hand, and in a voice that could freeze fire, said, "Mrs. Crane, I am Patricia Williamson, Attorney General of this state. You have just committed multiple felonies in my presence. And you are live streaming your own arrest." The look on Valerie's face was something I'll never forget. 1 second, righteous fury. The next, frozen terror, as the realization sank in. Her phone slipped, still recording, as 2 FBI agents stepped in from the doorway. "Mrs. Crane," Torres announced, her voice clear, "you are under arrest for fraud, extortion, embezzlement, and criminal harassment." The click of handcuffs closing echoed through the cabin, like the slam of a judge's gavel. Valerie's livestream captured everything: her stammering denials, her desperate cries about conspiracies, her heels scraping against the floor as they led her out. Neighbors gathered on the porch, eyes wide as they watched the self-styled Queen of the Lake community stumble past them in shackles. Mrs. Patterson had tears streaming down her face. Someone whispered, "It's over," and it was. For the first time in months, I felt the weight lift from my chest. Not just relief, but something deeper: vindication. 3 months later, I sat in the back row of a federal courtroom and watched justice land like a hammer. Judge Michael Harrison didn't mince words. He read through a litany of charges so long I lost track: fraud, conspiracy, embezzlement, harassment, witness intimidation. Valerie Crane stood there in her tailored suit. No camera crew this time, no loyal board members flanking her. Just a woman stripped of the illusion of power. When the sentence came, 3 years in federal prison, $400,000 in restitution to defrauded homeowners, and a lifetime ban from ever serving on an HOA board again, the room went still. Some gasped, some cried. I just sat there, hands folded, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Closure. Her husband wasn't far behind. The ethics probe revealed he'd been funneling insider zoning information to developers tied to Valerie's scheme. He took a plea deal: 18 months for conspiracy and abuse of office. The empire they'd built on intimidation and greed crumbled overnight. Back at the lake, the effect was immediate. The HOA dissolved within weeks. In its place, we formed the Clearwater Lake Volunteer Association. No mandatory fees. No citations. No power-hungry presidents. Just neighbors meeting once a month under the pavilion to talk about dock repairs, trash pickup, and the annual kids fishing derby. The first time we gathered, someone brought a guitar. Someone else fired up a grill, and for the first time in years, laughter carried across the water instead of whispers of fear. The Attorney General called our case a turning point and used it to push through statewide HOA reforms. They named one of the bills the Walker Act, though I never asked for it. From now on, every HOA in the state had to undergo independent audits and submit clear records of how funds were used. No more shadow accounts. No more community funds that disappeared into someone's pockets. And for me, well, life changed in ways I couldn't have predicted. The whistleblower program awarded me compensation for helping recover the stolen funds. That check, $45,000, felt like more than money. It felt like recognition that standing your ground matters. I used part of it to fix Pop's dock and part to set up a scholarship fund for kids heading into trade schools. Pop always said the best thing you can give a young person is the tools to work with their hands. The rest I spent on something that wasn't for me at all. A guest cabin, a place where other folks fighting their own HOA battles could come, stay, and find the courage to push back. Because if Valerie taught me anything, it's that these kinds of bullies don't just exist here. They're in towns and neighborhoods all across America, and sometimes all someone needs is proof that you can fight back and win. The ripple effects were everywhere. The Hendersons moved back, reclaiming a cabin they'd been forced to sell under duress. Mrs. Patterson came home from Florida and hosted a block party that lasted until sunrise. Property values bounced back, higher than before. Because buyers finally felt safe investing in a community no longer ruled by fear. Even the state environmental agency got involved, turning my off-grid setup into a showcase for sustainable living. School groups started visiting to learn about solar power, rainwater collection, and how old-fashioned craftsmanship could blend with modern technology. What Valerie once called unsightly was now a model. And then there were the quiet moments, the ones that meant the most. Sitting on Pop's porch with the loons calling across the lake, watching the sunset turn the water gold, knowing that for the first time in years, the peace I'd worked my whole life to earn was truly mine. The Netflix crew showed up not long after. They called the documentary HOA Hell: How One Man Took Down a Criminal Empire. I didn't care much about the cameras, but I cared about the message. People need to know they're not alone, that these neighborhood dictators can be beaten, and that sometimes the little guy armed with nothing but stubbornness, truth, and a good stack of paperwork, really can topple Goliath. The final scene they filmed was me, standing on the dock with Pop's fishing rod in hand. The same dock that had started it all. The narrator asked me what lesson I'd take from the fight. I didn't hesitate. The moment you stop letting someone else write the rules for your life, I said, is the moment you start living on your own terms. And if the fight is worth it, you don't stop until the key is in your hand. That's the story. That's the victory. And that's the legacy I'll leave behind on Clearwater Lake,